When you first get into videography, you quickly realize, oh, I need to keep my shutter speed fixed. And if I want to film in log, I need to keep my ISO at a minimum value. And the sun is blasting like crazy, and even closing down my lens to f/22 won't give me a proper exposure. Your whole screen is filled with zebras. No, not that kind. I mean this kind. Everything is overexposed. There are children crying because they've been blinded from looking at your overexposed screen. If you're anything like me, this is the point where you realized you need a variable ND filter. Something that simply makes everything darker before it hits your camera. You then probably hopped online, saw how expensive those ND filters can get, and opted for one of the cheaper versions. The one I bought cost me about 40 bucks, I think, and I've been using it for the past 5 years, even though it has actively been making my videos worse. I'll talk about that in a minute, but first, what even makes an ND filter good? First, very simple, does it do the ND filter things? So does it allow you to get a proper exposure at a reasonable aperture? Second, does it keep your image roughly the same, so it doesn't introduce any color cast or lose contrast or lose sharpness or whatever? Basically, does it not turn the beautiful image of your expensive camera and lens into shit? Third, is it easy to use? Does it allow you to easily put it on, take it off, and adjust your exposure? You might think that all of the companies out there selling millions of cheap variable ND filters have thought about their products for a few minutes and identified these 3 key criteria to make a good ND filter, right? Well, you'd be totally wrong, because this shitty thing failed at all 3. And the stupid thing is, I didn't even realize how bad the experience of using this filter was until I got my hands on some actually good filters. For some reason, I never saw the need to upgrade my ND filter because I didn't actually use it that often. I do film a lot of stuff indoors, and I do film a lot of stuff on my iPhone for my photography videos. But what I've now realized is that the reason why I wasn't using it often is because I had subconsciously started to adjust my behavior so I didn't have to use it. I often didn't use log so I didn't have to increase my ISO. I closed my lens down to f/22 even though that's not a great idea. I often didn't get the ND filter out because I knew it was a hassle and would make my image look weird. And sometimes if the scene was too bright, I just didn't film it or didn't film clips with the sky in them, as stupid as that sounds. And even more stupid was I didn't realize I was doing this. I just thought that must be normal and never thought twice about how much it was impacting my workflow. Just like when you look at your credit card statement and you have to think a second time about all of the camera gear you've bought. Nope, I don't want to know, just take it away, okay? I don't want to know. That's what I mean when I say this cheap ND filter was making my videos worse. I had to work around it instead of with it. And that didn't even click in my mind before I used a proper filter system for the first time when NiSi sent over their Swift system for me to test. And I'm actually giving one of these away. I'll tell you in a couple of minutes how you can enter that giveaway. And as usual, everything I say in this video stems from my own thoughts. NiSi has in no way compensated me to endorse this product, only supplied the system so I can test and review it. Of course, comparing the NiSi filters to the cheap filter isn't a fair comparison. It's like comparing a fancy sports car to the bicycle you lost your first tooth with. But this isn't supposed to be a fair comparison. The NiSi system simply offers a baseline to show how good a filter can be, so we can evaluate how bad the cheap one is. First off, the Swift system consists of 3 filters actually. One is a 1 to 5 stop variable ND. This is your base filter. The other is a fixed 4 stop ND. When you plonk this on top of the base filter, it simply adds 4 stops reduction. Now we have a range of 5 to 9 stops. The third filter is a mist filter, but we're gonna talk about that later. The cheap filter is advertised as an ND2 to 400, at least that's what it says on the box. Yeah, that means it is supposed to filter up to 8 2/3 stops of light. Well, in reality, it can barely match the 5 stops the base NiSi filter can do. I of course only realized this when putting the 2 filters head to head. No wonder in the past I had situations where I was still overexposed, even with the filter cranked. You also can't even turn the cheap ND filter to the maximum, because that'll get you that infamous X pattern across your image. This is about the maximum you can turn this filter without getting the cross. With the NiSi's full 9 stops of reduction at 800 ISO and a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second, I could film into the midday sky at f3.5. That's impressive. Okay, so we've confirmed point 1 of what makes an ND filter good. It actually does what it says on the box. Let's get to the second point. How does the filter affect the image? When first putting the comparisons I had filmed side by side, I thought the NiSi filter looked quite a bit more magenta. But then I realized, no, the NiSi filter isn't magenta. The cheap ND filter just has a super heavy green tint. In this comparison in the woods, it isn't obvious because everything is green anyways. But when you add skin tones to the mix, you realize how bad the cheap filter is. Not only does my skin lose a lot of what I would call normal human color, it gets heavily pushed into the greens, and especially all of these shadows in the back just turn into a green mush under the cheap ND filter. This can become a huge problem if you are shooting a project with 2 or more cameras, or even just have 2 or more of these cheap ND filters for different lenses. Because when your filter affects the image this much and is so inconsistent with reality, and you now need to color match the footage, you're gonna have a worse time than when I sat on a glass table as a kid and wanted to see how much I can make the glass tabletop wobble. Yeah, that day ended with me in the hospital. Not my brightest moment. Not my smartest moment, nope. So yeah, for some reason this cheap filter makes everything look like it came out of the Incredible Hulk's butt, and I have no idea how I never noticed that. So take this as an actual warning. If you don't compare ND filters side by side, it's really hard to know what kind of color shifts or whatever they are introducing. So I'm really sad that I have so much footage from cool trips that I just, have apparently filmed through the Incredible Hulk's butt. The NiSi filters, whether that is the 1 to 5 stops or the 5 to 9 stops, stay very neutral and very similar to not using a filter at all. Also, when rotating the filter and moving through the reduction steps, the filter stays consistent. For any sort of color correction, especially when working with skin tones, this is what you want, a filter that affects your color as little as possible. Comparing the sharpness to the cheap filter also shows that the cheap filter is definitely decreasing the imaging quality. One of the reasons I didn't use my cheap ND filter that often is because I've always been a hybrid shooter. I switch between photo and video all the time, and I always knew when I screw on the ND filter, it's gonna make my photos look like crap. But with the NiSi, this luckily isn't a concern anymore because it maintains sharpness and color so much better. All of these tests are actually really embarrassing for me, not gonna lie, because I pretend to know what I'm doing on the internet. And apparently, I have been using this shit ND filter for way too long. Moving on to point 3, usability. The more you get into videography or filmmaking, the more videos you make, the more you film, there's a point where you realize how important usability is. And this is another point where the cheap ND filter just miserably fails. Where do I even begin? First off, as I mentioned, you can't turn the filter all the way. Up until this point is the maximum before you get the cross pattern. But when you need to turn it while filming and you're focused on other stuff, you never exactly know how far can I turn it before I get the pattern. Also, what is this scale on the side of the filter? A growing bar chart? This makes it sheerly impossible to judge by how many stops you've adjusted your exposure. Also, you can turn this filter forever in any direction, and it's really annoying to grip because the rotation has quite a bit of resistance and the part you grip to rotate is really thin. As a person with sweaty hands, this is super annoying to adjust. The NiSi filter has hard stops, it's only adjustable in the actual usable range. Also, you can add this little lever to the side, which makes it so much easier to adjust with one hand. The resistance is just right, where it's easy to adjust but won't be easily changed on accident. These stops are marked on the top, and the great thing is once you've gotten used to it, you can roughly judge the distance of each stop blindly. When you add the 4 stop ND, it basically overwrites the 1 to 5 stop markings with the 5 to 9 stop markings, and of course there is the included mist filter. This can also simply be added to the front, and another big plus is the included lens cap. With most ND filters, you can't add a lens cap anymore, forcing you to keep the filter exposed all the time or take it off to put your camera away. but this way you can actually just add the lens cap on top and quickly put your camera in your bag without having to worry. All of these usability features for me actually are one of the biggest upsides of this system. It's quick to use and doesn't get in the way. The longer I do this YouTube thing, the more value I put on gear that helps me optimize my workflow and stays out of my way while doing what it's supposed to do. Let's talk about that 1/4 mist filter some more. The way you recognize a good mist filter is whether it still keeps contrast in the image. This one performs really well in that regard. Some people love the look, some people hate it. I personally really like the look you can get with the mist filter if it's used well. The Swift kit with the mist filter and the 2 ND filters and this pouch will run you about €300 here in Germany, but it depends on the size you want. This might sound like a lot for a couple of filters, but I wish I could go back in time and slap past me for using this horrible cheap filter, because I have so many shots from important trips that I took with this cheap ND filter and I simply cannot fix these shots afterwards. The way I see it is either you buy a cheap ND filter for $40 and regret it a couple of years later and then buy good filters, or you buy a high quality set of filters once from the start and use them for the next decade, not worrying about a thing. The initial investment is well worth it, especially when doing commercial work, and from a usability standpoint alone, the price makes sense. I really wish somebody had told me that a couple of years back. But if you don't want to spend any money, you can also head over to my Instagram where I am giving away one of these kits for you to win. Thank you for listening to my extensive thoughts on cheap and expensive ND filters, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye. Also, thank you for 10,000 subs. Like, that's an actually crazy big number. It's really hard to comprehend.